Subscribe to Geomami Mumbai Film Festival and hit the bell icon to keep yourself updated on conversations on Dial M for Films. Welcome to another session of Dial M for Films. Writer, lyricist, director Anvita Dutt came to Mumbai in 1993. She was 21 and her first job was at an advertising agency called Everest. Her salary for the first year of being employed was rupees 2000 a month. 1300 out of 2000 would go to her landlady, Mrs. Muneem, 200 in tax, and 500 is what she lived on. She spent 14 years in advertising. For a person who grew up as an awkward introvert, blazing through libraries and enchanted worlds that interested her far more than the one she lived in, her greatest take back from these years in advertising was the market research. Her window into the inner worlds of people, their lives, their decisions. You can be deeply interested in people without wanting to hang out with them. She said to me in one of our chats, at a career crossroad between 2005 and 2007, she found herself writing for films. She has enjoyed respect, fame, and adulation as a commissioned writer, but something shifted the day the idea of Bulbul planted itself in her heart in 2008. Though she only got around to writing the first draft of Bulbul 4 years later in Goa in 2012. It took her 14 days to write the first draft. 12 years and 12 drafts later, Bulbul released on Netflix this year to a rousing response. Nothing in her filmography prepared me for Bulbul. Maybe I should have looked at Anvita's bookshelf. Her first friends, her greatest influence, her refuge, her keys to unlocking imagination, books and how they shape creation is what we will talk about today. Welcome to Dial M for Films, Anvita. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much, Priti. It's amazing. I still am filled with joy every time I think about it. It's awesome. It's good to be here.
So, Anvita, I want to start with asking you a question about your early years, that you spent with books. They were your first friends. Your dad was in the Air Force. You had access to the cantonment libraries of whichever city you moved to. Your grand escape from this world into another. What happens to the mind of a child that surrenders to reading?
So I think for me, it started off with I was in the first standard. We were posted in Guwahati. And my Masi came for one of those summer holiday visits and she just got me 2 books as a gift. Now, before this, I'd never engaged with a storybook, and these 2 belonged to me. This was Masha and the Bear and The Little Clay Hut. I can't even begin to tell you what it felt like to lose yourself in a story, to be in a world that is other from yours, and it's magical. And then I realized that the cantonment has a library, and there are books. There are many more books that you can go to and pick up and read. And of course, initially as a child, because the kind of covers that this book had, the illustrations and the magical kind of quality to it, those are the ones that I went to that time when I was in the first. But then the greed for stories became so much, and I was always a bit of an odd child. I was an introvert, and somehow this world seemed to be so much more fascinating to me than the real world, that I became indiscriminate in my choice of reading. So then it became about, so in libraries, in cantonment libraries, they're not kept according to genre and things like that. They are just kept from A to Z, the books. So I just started reading from the first book in A, and that's what I started doing. And till I left my father's house to come to Bombay to work, that's what I did. And by the time I think I was about 12, I used to consume the library at least 2 times before we got posted out. Papa got transferred every 2 years. I read everything, whether it was age appropriate or not. No one was telling me that this is what you're supposed to read. So I remember in school us being recommended by a teacher to read Charles Dickens. When I got it, I had no idea what I'd read when I was younger. I got it, I picked it up and read it, and I was like, oh, but I've read this in Sarsawas. In Sarsawa, I was about in the 6th standard. So I'd already read Dickens when I was in the 6th. Mustn't have understood half of it, but you know that it's engaging you, that it's a story. And I wouldn't know how to pronounce most of the words because no one is saying those words in conversation. And I learned the meanings of words. I mean, I discovered dictionaries a little later, but only through context. So in the story, in that line, the character is feeling something. I don't know what it means. But because I know what the story is doing, I'm guessing what that word means. And the joy of it, that finally when you look at a dictionary, you realize, oh, that's actually what it means. So you understood it, so that, of course, the first of it, your vocabulary, you become, I think, more literate. Not just, I mean, your textbooks only go thus far. Stories make you more literate because you are learning new words, learning new thoughts, new concepts. So that, and also I think just as a human being, it teaches you empathy. It teaches you, as a child, it teaches you that it's okay to be odd. Really, the odd people who are protagonists in books, the so-called underdog, the person who finally slays the dragon is the least likely person in the the cast of characters, so to speak. So there's hope for bravery, for being bigger and better than you are, for being kinder than you are. So those kind of things you start learning just by association. And most importantly, imagination is like a muscle. You start exercising that muscle. And therefore, your ability to imagine, daydream a better future for yourself, a better life for yourself, a better idea of yourself starts happening. And also a better world for others. And, there's always hope for something magical out there because you can imagine it.
What you said was really wonderful, that it teaches you empathy. And I think the first person you are empathetic towards when you do feel at odds with the world and you delve into the world of books is that it teaches you to be first empathetic towards yourself. That I'm not a freak, that this can exist, and then the empathy goes on to others. Anvita, there was a certain, like you said, it was your engagement with books was wild. Like, you were reading alphabetically, there was no one guiding you, there was nobody telling you that this is age appropriate, this is not. And there was a pattern that started to form after you went through libraries twice or thrice. You grew, as you grew older, you gravitated towards the fantastic. What is it that drew you to the world of fairies, demons, dragons, witches, and otherworldly creatures?
At that point in time, I was just so hungry for words and for stories that I actually really enjoyed everything that I read. I just loved everything that I read, So, and as a child, you're allowed to only issue one book at a time. So what I used to do was I used to read one in the library and take one home. And then I became a faster and faster reader that I could finish a book. I think I became an insomniac only because I wanted to finish my books, and I would read during the night. After lights out, I would sit and read. But I think I have to blame Bram Stoker. I was 13. I was in my 8th standard. And so some time had gone by the time I reached Stoker. I read Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I tasted blood.
Quite literally.
I was like, oh my God, this is possible. First of all, the narrative is so, it's so interesting. I mean, when you're reading something like that for the first time, till then you're reading, I'd read a lot of the classics, I'd read crime and, the kind of stuff that is usually there in libraries, books. Dracula, the story is being told from so many different points of views, and there's a manuscript, and there are letters, and there's this all sorts of things happening, and it's so interesting to read a different structure of storytelling. But also, my God, the world of myth and vampires and Transylvania, it was magical. And then what started happening was that I would still read everything, but I would reread fantasy. And I started learning how to recognize fantasy. So I would look at the back, read the first few pages, and get a sense of, okay, is there a demon in here somewhere? And that's the book that I'd be like, okay, mine. And those I would keep issuing and reissuing, like almost like second to owning it. I would do everything in my power to read those books again and again. And I started just getting drawn to that. And I think it's also to do with the fact, like I said, that, imagination is a muscle that you exercise. I think to really and truly enjoy fantasy, I think you have to be a child, because fairy tales are fantasy. Those are your earliest stories that you consume. But to accept, not just that there are two people in a room and then someone kills someone and then you have to figure out what happened, kind of, you can imagine it. It's not that hard to imagine. I mean, especially if you're slightly weird, it's easy to imagine. But to imagine other worlds requires a certain kind of strength in your imaginative capacity, that it becomes easy for you to do. You don't have to struggle at it. And I think because I'd read so much by then, fantasy became easy for me. And also what it taught me, that for you to set a story in a world that doesn't exist or may exist in the future, the emotions and the characters had to be so real, and you had to recognize them even if they were green in color. You would understand what they're feeling. And that was another thing which I thought was incredible. Of course, at that point in time, you're just eating up stories. You're just
something else also happened. Like at the age of 11, not only were you reading books copiously, but you also started writing.
Yeah.
You also started putting thoughts to paper. First of all, what compelled you to write at such an early age, and what were you writing about?
So I have no idea. Smriti, I actually thought that everybody must be doing it. I mean, I didn't even think that I was doing something odd or different by sitting down to write stories and poems. Thank God they don't exist anywhere and nobody can look at them now. But I used to do it to process what I felt. And because now I'm daydreaming so much, because my mind is working, so anything I hear can trigger off a situation in my head that obviously doesn't exist. Also, I would, like, we'd go to the mess, and whereas other children would be playing or hanging out together, I would, of course, either be in the library, but if you're scolded and then told ki mix with other people and like be like other children, I would sit in a corner and watch people and make up stories about them. Or I would see, James the bearer in the bar of the mess. I would wonder what his life must be like once he goes home, or before he comes here. What happens in his life, and make up situations that were completely ridiculous and fantastical in nature. So and because you're an odd child, you don't fit in, you don't know whom to talk to and what about, because when people are reading Enid Blyton, not that there's anything wrong with reading Enid Blyton, I was reading Dickens. Now suddenly you are an odd child, you're introverted, and now you have nothing to talk about. There's nothing in common. And you also kind of start becoming a little judgmental about the conversations that other people are having. Very wrong. This is before the age you get empathy from reading. That time you're just like, no one knows what I'm thinking.
No one knows.
No one knows what's going on. So I think just because all of that was happening in my mind and I needed companionship other than needed to have a conversation, not just with my imaginary friends in the books, I started writing. So if I was sad, I would write. If I was angry, I would write. If I was lonely, I would write. And I thought, I mean, everybody does it till I realized that everybody doesn't. But yeah, I started writing. I even wrote a crime novel, but I stopped around, I think, chapter 20 or something, because I got really frightened. Very early lesson in writing. I realized, so I had the idea in my head. I knew who was the killer, obviously, because you're the writer, you're God. And halfway through that book, the characters started doing their own thing. They wouldn't listen to me. And I got so frightened because it felt like alchemy, magic, that they're taking on a life of their own. That I actually got scared of them. I was like, but why? But I think you are the killer, then why are you behaving like this? And it was just very frightening. And then you realize that's exactly what happens as I grew older and became a writer, that you have to trust beyond a point. You also have to trust the story and you have to trust your characters to do the right thing, to serve the story. They don't serve the writer serves the story. That's an early lesson, but it registered only later. But at that point in time, I got really scared. But yes, I wrote a lot of poetry, like notebooks and registers full of poetry.
I want to break down the trajectory of your exploration as a reader a little bit. You read, then you read some more, you discovered, then you discovered some more. What are your early influences and how did they progress from one to the other? How do you then, once you become aware of this, once that awareness comes in that, okay, I'm gravitating towards a certain kind of literature, and now I want to read more, now I want to delve into more, now I want to go to another author. How did that develop? How did that progress?
So, like I said, initially because of Dracula, I started getting drawn more and more. But because you are dependent on a library that exists in an Air Force station, I would read whatever was available to me. And I would read everything and just reread the ones that I thought were amazing. But I was about, I in fact turned 21 when I came to Bombay to work. I had gone to someone's house in Nasik for the weekend. And because I was an insomniac, I had a book with me because it was supposed to be actually a one-day trip, and then we decided to extend it. So my first thought is panic because my book is going to get over. So of course my book got over and it's some 2:30 in the morning. Now I'm wandering the house because I've got this thing of, okay, I know that in one of the rooms I saw almari usme 2-3 books thi. So I have gone and in the dark, gone, and all I've done by touch, because I can see vaguely, say I don't want to switch on the light because I'm going to wake up someone's going to come running. So I've just, through little bit of what I can see in the dark, in the moonlight, and through touch, I picked up the fattest book. The idea being, moti hai, good, I shall survive. And it's a book called The Talisman. Once I go to my room, I see The Talisman. Ooh. 2 authors wrote it, which also I was fascinated by. I said, 2 people, how can 2 people write together? That's also interesting. They are people I did not know. I'd not discovered them in my libraries. What a waste. But nevertheless, I started reading that book. So it's about 2:30. It's such a thick book. I finished it at about 7 in the morning. Oh my God. Now, this is how you discover new authors. Now, how you discover new authors now is you go into a bookstore, which is a luxury that we do not have, or rather an opportunity we don't get. We go onto Amazon and there's only so much that you can find new authors on Amazon. You will order stuff that you know or you've heard about. But when you browse in a bookstore is how you find new authors. So you read something and you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. The 2 names on that book were Stephen King and Peter Straub. So now what that did was that when I came back to Bombay from Nasik, so I couldn't afford to buy books from the bookstores. I used to buy secondhand books from the roadside near Churchgate station. These are those 500 rupee days. But even from buying it from the street, they were like for $50, $60. So I used to calculate, okay, if I don't have lunch for 2 days, I can buy a book. That was my
God.
It was
Anvita, you were already ordering extra sambar without ordering the sambar.
Yes, correct. Or at least trying to and failing miserably. Yes, sorry. But so I used to be like, by then I'd gotten used to hunger. I was like, "Do din lunch nahi khaungi, so that means I can buy a book." The calculation made a whole lot of sense to me. So now I went hunting for, strangely for some reason, it was Stephen King and Peter Straub. So I saw Stephen King first. The second one that I picked up, it was called It. It only had his name on it. I was like, oh, it's so he doesn't write every book of his. Yes, that's it, The Talisman in It. So I discovered Stephen King. What an outstanding writer. And luckily for me, so prolific. And by the time I found him, which was around 93, he'd already been writing for some time. So I had a gala time try to, like, I had lots of books to read. And because you're not Googling, you don't have the thing that somebody will tell you, then you would ask people that, who are the other people like him? Who write like him. So then, of course, Peter Straub happened because he was the other name on the thing. So I was like, oh my God. Then I moved jobs, started earning the grand sum of $8,000. And I was like, oh my God, I'm rich now. And so I started going to bookstores, Strand bookstore. What a beautiful, beautiful bookstore that is. And then you realize, okay, this genre is called fantasy. Didn't even know that. And science fiction, discovered Ray Bradbury. And that Ray Bradbury led to Ursula Le Guin. And you are like, your mind starts, it's just so incredible. And that's what bookstores do then. Bookstores lead you to other authors. Another thing that reading teaches you is you get a sense of it. You can tell how a writer writes by say, just reading the first chapter. And you read the first chapter and you know, this person there's heft over here. And I think those years when I started earning and I could choose the books that I was reading is when I truly discovered speculative fiction, fantasy, science fiction. And thanks to there were bookstores in Bombay those days in every corner.
Coming to what is also fascinating, and I know I've said it in my Insta post and I said it in my introduction. Now the thing is that the years that you've spent, working in advertising and then subsequently working in film, there is a filmography, there is a body of work which is very solid, but it is a certain kind of body of work, and nowhere does it inform you of what your first step as a director, writer that works not as a commission writer but for yourself. No one, I don't know, I know that the script had gone to Skeptic Tank, the Sunday morning script group that you had. There was a circle of trust formed with a bunch of very fabulous creators that you shared the script with. But 14 years in advertising, 14 years in films, out of which, there were 12 years that you spent making, writing, thinking about Bulbul. You did recognized work, but, what did those 25 years contribute to your journey as a creator?
I think first and foremost, by then I'd read more. So that always helps. Also, what it does is, whether it's advertising or writing for films, you get to meet more people, get to understand more people. You also learn the basic craft of writing, writing a film. It's a very different kind of a skill set. And to learn that, it takes time. And I did that, and I had a lot of fun doing that, working on all sorts of films. But just as actors get typecast, Smriti, even writers get typecast. You do something and it works, you get called for more of that, which is great. I mean, it's good for you. You have fun doing it. You're learning something. And people are liking what you're doing, and it's paying the rent. So you are quite happy doing it. But what it also tells you is, what it also teaches you is what you don't want to write. Because here I am reading Angela Carter and Neil Gaiman, and people are like running through the daisies, and in my stories, they will run through the daisies, and the daisies would be man-eating daisies, and they will suddenly look shorter because they've been eating kidneys. But that wasn't happening. So that, I think somewhere the impetus came from there. I also got a compliment from someone around that time, around 2000, and somewhere early years of my writing career, that somebody was talking of me. It was a compliment, saying that, what is so wonderful about Anvita is that she, जिसके साथ काम करती है उसके जैसी बन जाती है. I have walked away from that, been furious with myself. And I have, like, you get so angry that you have tears in your eyes. I was like that angry. I was like, what are you doing? You left advertising, the joy of wanting to write films, because you don't want to write to a brief, or, all those, that the bandish is no longer there. You are writing a story. And you're doing the same thing that you're doing in advertising. I think somewhere there are these little tipping points that happen. And one day, just out of the blue, I woke up in the middle of the night, and Bulbul came. So I think a lot of, you learn how stories work. You also learn what is it that you want to say. Also, as a human being, just as the person that I was, say, in my 20s or in my early 30s, I'm not that person today. And the things that bother me and move me have changed, or the degree to which they bother me has changed. The things that matter to me also, just maybe a little bit of wisdom in terms of what can, a lots more empathy. You actually see and receive men or women, and you understand what is wrong with the world, and you want to talk about it, or what is wrong with your world. It's, even if you go in your inner world and something's like a thorn in your side, it's bothering you, and the only way you make sense of it, like I did when I was 11, is you write about it. So I think that's what these years have done.
So I'm very curious to know that, when does I never questioned fairy tales till big articles started coming out, people started writing about subversion. You also got access to that kind of writing, where there are courses in universities abroad that dissect fairy tales and their origin, and what they intended to say, and how they were sort of pinkified, later, sanitized, made more vanilla for kids. I would like to ask you, who has always engaged with that world, and deeply so, that when did the idea of subversion, you became aware of the idea of subversion, the mystery, the hidden meaning in fairy tales, and the various versions that exist? Because I never looked at fairy tales as cautionary tales of bigger ideas.
So actually, I think I was exposed. I won't say I became aware. I would say that I was exposed to it before I knew what the word subversion means. So, or how to spell it. So I was reading fairy tales, and what you are getting exposed to is Disney and the so-called children's books, children's section. The section that you're led to, like in the school libraries, in the library period, you'd be taken to the children's section, and I would find nothing that I wanted to read. And sometimes initially, when you're too shy, or you don't know how to say it, that I don't want to read this, you would pick up stuff. I'd start reading stuff, and I'd be very taken aback by the vanilla version. So it's really interesting, like Grimm brothers. if you read, they themselves actually kind of vanillafied their stories by the time their third edition came out. Because the first edition, just to give you an example, Sleeping Beauty. Okay, Sleeping Beauty, the original version is that yes, there's a curse, and yes, the girl pricks her finger on a spindle and falls asleep, and the vanilla version has, or the safe version has, that then a prince comes riding in and kisses her, and she wakes up, and they lived happily ever after. But in the original version, she wakes up when she goes into labor. She gives birth to a baby. So that means while she was sleeping, the prince did come, literally.
Yeah.
And so here's a cautionary tale. Young girl, don't spend your life with your eyes closed, sleeping through your life, because you'll be left holding the baby. So very basic level, that is what it is telling you. And what they didn't realize, or what they did not expect, is because actually these are all myths and urban legends of that time that they had collated. Okay. And parents started, because it's about fairies and ghouls and demons and things like that, they started telling the children like the bedtime stories, but cutting out, editing, self-editing the stories and telling the children. And lots of letters were sent to them saying that these are too scary for children, they're not meant for children. So they were like, but they were never meant for children. But they realized that here's a market opportunity. People are reading this to children, and so many more people will buy these books. So they, by the third edition, started cleaning up the stories. And then Andrew Lang did the same with a lot of the European, British kind of myths and legends and all of that. And then, of course, Disney came along, and very pretty frocks and daisies were left of the story, and most of it was just gone. So you do realize actually the original material is already in a what we call today subversion.
Exactly.
Strangely, they were already dark and cautionary tales and interesting takes and mostly for girls. There were warnings for girls hidden in there, whether it was Red Riding Hood or whether it was Rapunzel or Sleeping Beauty. And then writers came along and started subverting. Now, the interesting thing is, if you know the original, you know the vanilla version, and then you see what another writer does with it, that's where the joy is, when you start seeing. So I was in the 9th when I read a story. So I'm reading it and I'm like, it reads like Snow White. Okay. Now, if I tell you the Snow White story, there's a girl as pale as snow. Okay. When she's born, her mother dies in childbirth. Okay. And the stepmother comes and she looks for her in mirrors. And she tries to kill her and says, I want her heart. And as I was reading that story, I started getting goose flesh, because I was like, it's reading like what I know of Snow White, but there was a grimness, a darkness to the way these little gems about the story were being revealed. Now, by then, of course, I'd read Bram Stoker, but I'd also then read a lot of vampire mythology. So vampires pale as snow. If a vampire is born and not made, will kill the mother in the birthing. The only way you can kill a vampire is to take out its heart or stake it. Okay, and what that writer had done was actually told the Snow White story, revealing the vampire myth in it. So in that, Snow White is the bad guy. It's the stepmother, poor thing, looking in the mirrors, because vampires can't be seen in the mirrors. She's trying to rid the kingdom of an evil. Poor thing. Misunderstood by all. And I started getting more and more drawn to the aspect of the people that are being branded as the bad guys. Why are they the bad guys? I started realizing that when they talk about witches, these are actually wise women who are being seen as crones, wise women. They know more than the men in the village. So they are frightened of them. So they want to burn them at the stake, kill them. You know, poor thing, Hansel and Gretel, they bloody throw her, uska ghar hai, uski ghar mein aate, uski chori karte, usko oven mein phenk ke chale jate. You start feeling so bad for the witches. And then around that time is when I read Jane Eyre. And I remember being heartbroken when I read Jane Eyre for Bertha. Because I finished reading the book and I was like, 1 minute, this bastard has locked up this woman. She's darker of skin. You know, she's already other. You know, she's already the other. And she came from a traumatic past. God knows, today we would have said PTSD, nervous breakdown, whatever. You lock her up, of course, she's going to go bloody insane. And she's going to try to burn your house down. Then you bring a pretty young wife into the house. The Victorian sensibility wali achhi ladki. I felt so bad for Bertha. I was wrecked by Bertha. I was like, but what about Bertha when I finished the book? You know, so again, maybe because I was reading stories of the other, I started valuing the other and started digging deeper into what, and then imagining what is it that must have gone on that you would treat her like this.
You know, it's so lovely to hear you say that, because now more than ever, I mean, at all times, you know, looking at somebody else's point of view is invaluable. The thing is that we never question the hypothesis, and unfortunately, you know, 80% of the people, when they engage with fairy tales and other worlds, you always imagine yourself as the good guy. You never imagine yourself as the chudel or the cruel person who's being portrayed as that. Exactly. So I'm just saying that, you know, it's only when life happens, when you start to grow older, if a person is not thinking like you and consuming like you, that you tend to sort of even question the fairy tale or the world and say that, you know, let me understand this person. So like you said, Bertha, everybody thinks of her as an inconvenience, that she's the person who's coming between these two lovely people who want to be together. So coming to Bulbul, and I know that this is the most basic question I can ask you, but I really want to ask you this: that how did all of that reading that you did, Anvita, before you know, Bulbul came? I also want to know which is the first image that flashed in your head that night when you thought about it and you wrote a 2-pager. But how did reading over these years inform Bulbul? How do you think you arrived at even that image, and how was it influenced by all of this?
So actually, the very first image that came into my mind was just these feet withdrawing under the sari, you know, just darke, pair, so just the feet. It's there. It's that shot is still in the film. So that was just the first image that came into my mind. So when I just opened my eyes, I was sleeping. And I sat up and I was like, whose feet? Like almost like, what was that? And then I was like, oh, she's going to be hurt so badly. And I'm like half asleep. Now I'm going towards my desk. So suddenly there are these things that are, I think everything is just kind of this jigsaw. Over the years, a jigsaw has been forming and you're not even aware of it. And I sat down and I wrote a 2-pager. I think it's from everything that I've read, like you talked about the subversion of fairy tales, how women are viewed, how wise women are viewed, how being gentle is seen as a sign of weakness, you know, and you will crush someone who's quiet. Now it's also, I think maybe because it's my first one, in terms of just, I'm not saying the story, but in terms of just the personality, it's the closest to me. So the younger me was like the younger Bulbul. So even the child was like me, always on trees. You have a fascination for Daravni Kahani, you know. So there is that. wants to write down things, make up stories, but is like a diamond, only refracts. So it is other people's opinion of you that starts impacting who you are. The people, if people treat you nice, you're happy. People treat you bad, you're sad. Your equilibrium is decided by other people. And I was that girl, and I was soft spoken and gentle and very afraid of ruffling any feathers, hurting people, you know. And in fact, my father used to call me Kugi, which is Punjabi for dove, because I was gentle, you know. And you learn this very harsh lesson that when you are like that, it's not taken at face value. People see it as a sign of weakness, as a sign of someone who can be crushed by a word, by a gesture. And you start hardening yourself and you start building walls. And of course, then time and wisdom teaches you that your center is just you. You are complete in yourself. That lesson. So all those lessons had to be learned for me to be able to write those images that I'm talking about. So I kind of started pouring out maybe what I had felt, you know, that she loves to read, she plays on trees, that all she wants is a little bit of friendship, recognition, just wants to laugh, just wants to tell a story. And then, of course, because it's a story, because the feet came, somehow the feet, and that thing, I'd heard that many years ago, somebody told me, कि बिछुए इसलिए पहनते हैं.
Exactly, that.
So somebody had told me that बिछुए इसलिए पहनते हैं, पायल इसलिए क्योंकि, because I love wearing anklets. I wear them all the time, even now in lockdown. Is because you know where the girls of the house are, you can hear them. So it's protection, but along the journey, the protection becomes
Control.
And patriarchy. While I was writing it, and I was writing, you know, just like bichwe kyo pehante, and the next thing that came into my mind was a bloodied bichwa. And then the next image that came into my mind was lightning and a man just lifting the poker. And that was there in the 2-pager, which I sat on for very long because I was convinced that I did not know how to write the story, that I don't have the ability to write. I was like, "Arey, kitni achhi kahani," and keep it aside. And yeah, that's what happened first with Bulbul. That's how she arrived, quietly in the middle of the night, and just shaking everything up. And maybe bits of me are there, bits of what I'd read. And again, the subversion that a chudel is a chudel. हमको तो घर में अगर तेज भागो या स्कूल के कॉरिडोर में बैठो तो खींच के चुड़ैल, you know, you are called the chudel. And I was like, yes, so what if she becomes a chudel? And then, of course, because I'm interested in everything, because I've read the myths, I know how a chudel is formed. So a chudel always has a human origin. And chudels are born of, they rise from the dead if they die because of a violent act or rape. And in fact, women who die even today in villages are either cremated or buried face down with their feet tied, because they are so afraid that she'll come back. And it's incredible how afraid you are. You will inflict cruelty, but there's a part of you that is telling you that this is a risk you're taking, that she will come back.
And with nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. So setting it in another world is like for Ursula Le Guin to set the left hand of darkness on a planet called Winter. You know, you can set it wherever you want, but what I wanted to say was these things, these little things, everyday horror, you know, the tiny cruelties of ignoring someone or thwarting someone or squashing someone, just everyday chipping away at someone's sense of self. And then, of course, the brutal acts of violence which exist much, much worse than what I've shown in the film or talked about in the film exist. And all those things I think came together. And all I knew was that the churel was a good, and I knew that they were responsible for making her a churel. That little girl on the trees is going to come back. She's going to be on the trees still. She's still going to be running wild. She's going to be having fun. She's still going to be plucking mangoes. But she'll also be biting off the heads of the bad guys, which I thought was pretty awesome.
Well, Anvita, if Bulbul is Anvita light, I want to see what Anvita fully loaded looks like. So, I didn't have this question on my roster, but I'm just so curious now. I wanted to ask you that how does it help a narrative, and what happens to a narrative when, like you said earlier in the session, that the emotions and the people have to be really authentic. They have to be real. And the world around that doesn't have to be real, right? What happens to a narrative or a story when you situate it in a fantastical world? How does it add to that narrative? If it is authentic, if the emotions are authentic, how does it inform the narrative or make it richer if it's not situated in a place that we know?
I think one, that the moment you show or talk about another world, it's a promise. It is a hope. It's promise. It is something other than what you have right now. So the possibility of something may be better, or sometimes even worse, to tell you that this is where it can go if you carry down the path that you're on. If you read a lot of the science fiction stories that were written in the 60s or the 50s, everything that was in there already exists. One of the very interesting, I'm going to segue into another thing. There was a survey done with creators who worked in engineers who worked for Apple, for Microsoft, for Google, the brains, the guys who are creating new technologies, the guy who came up with the iPod, or the iPhone or whatever. And they all had many things were dissimilar, but they all had one thing in common. They all read science fiction growing up. So it gives you the ability to imagine something else. Everyone imagined something, and that's how it came into be. Even in terms of science, you imagine that इतनी गर्मी होती है यहाँ, खाना खराब हो जाता है. What if मेरी अलमारी ऐसी होती कि मैं उसमें खाना रखती and it would not go bad, remains cool and doesn't get spoiled, and a refrigerator is born. So when you imagine other worlds, that happens. That is one, that it could be better or worse, and the possibility of it. The other thing that it does is it frees the storyteller. And now, whatever it takes to tell you what I really want to tell you, I can do. The rules of the universe, which are very, very well defined, you have to define the rules of the universe, even if it is an imagined universe. You convince that person that this place exists through the people and through the rules of the universe, and you don't stray from the universe, so the people remain situated in that new world. And then you can do what you want, so that you can put across that point that you wanted to put across. You can do it in a realistic setup as well, but I think it's just more fun doing it in a fantastical world. So.
Anvita, is it more work?
Yes. See, that would be unfair to say stories set in the real world. No, everything requires work. Stories require work. You need to read and write every day, to put in the hard work, to have the patience, to surrender yourself to a world and to create that world from scratch. You learn that from reading. That comes from reading. You have to put in that hard work. It's great fun, but it's a lot of hard work. So it requires as much hard work to tell a realistic story as a fantastical story. But yes, you need to work that little bit harder to make it convincing. And by that I mean that your characters then need to be very situated and the emotions need to be very real. You can't falter there. Everywhere else, people are willing to forgive you. That okay, पैर ऐसे नहीं थे, उल्टे ऐसे हो सकते थे, पेड़ ऐसे नहीं थे, मूनलाइट लाल लाल की जगह ऑरेंज होती तो, या पर्पल होती तो anything is possible. People can question that, but they will never question the emotion. That you need to work a little bit harder on, which is what I think I was afraid to do, and which is why I was not going beyond the 2 pages. So I was like, oh, how is this going to happen?
So a big thanks to your friend Althea,
Yes.
who kind of forced you to write it in Goa in 2012. When you narrated the story, or when you actually gave the story to your contemporaries, Abhishek Chaubey at the Skeptic Tank actually told you that, because he writes descriptors very differently and you write your descriptors. I just want to tell everyone that in a script, descriptors are the non-talky portions or the action portions of the script that set up the atmospherics. He said that I can see the film. Your descriptors are just beautiful because you write them a certain way. Anvita, I would request you to just read out a scene from your script.
Scene 67. Interior Bulbul's bathroom night. Eyes closed, Bulbul's face is bathed in moonlight, her body cupped and held by a claw-footed tub. Indranil enters. He stands over her, looming large, his face wrecked with grief, betrayal, regret. There's almost a sense of tenderness as he reaches out to her. He grabs her hair, her eyes open, confused and lost. He yanks her out, she cries out in pain. Her feet, wrapped in silver, struggle for purchase, to no avail, splashing, slipping, sliding in the marble-held water. He throws her on the floor like a useless rag. She lands on the marble floor, wet, vulnerable. Breathless with rage, he looks down at her, doesn't say a word, thunder growls instead. She looks up at him, eyes widened in shock, like a child who doesn't know why it is being punished. He raises the poker, face twisted like a mythic bestial being. It looks like the poker will take a lifetime to go up. The poker sings as it cuts the air, as it goes up, 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 and then it comes down, rise and fall again. And then all we see is her face. All we see is the pain. All we see is incomprehension. Lightning billows as drops of rubies fly, fall, slowly sparkling. Her face pale, her cry trapped, she jerks like a puppet, the string of iron pulled by her unseen puppeteer. Her eyes, they ask us why this is happening, eyes that start looking beyond us, far away now. Her eyes, her eyes. The light leaves her, only the merciful darkness remains. In her eyes, on the screen.
Oh my God, I've got goosebumps. There is this expanse to your words, a live palpability, a swirl, a motion. Do you feel this would be different? Your descriptors would be different if you weren't a voracious reader?
I think so. I mean, I can only speak for myself. See, what I'm actually doing is I'm seeing something in my head. Right? So it's the reverse of imagining. Like I said, your imagination muscle that you exercise when you're reading a story. So when you're reading, what it does is you, versus watching something, where something has already been imagined and is now being shown to you. So you're not engaging with it at the level that you are when you're reading, because not only are you immersing yourself very patiently in a story and staying there, you're imagining people, imagining situations. When someone talks about a tree or the light or the way someone blinks, you're seeing it in your mind's eye. Writing for film is the reverse of that. So I'm seeing something in my head. Now I'm trying to put it down. So that has to be film relevant. It's not like she thought and she felt. It has to be whatever I can show you physically. Now, but what happens is, I can say the poker went up and hit her. Blood came out. But because I'm seeing it at a certain speed and I'm seeing it a certain way, the only way I can make sense of it is by writing it like this. And I think possibly I write it like this is because I read. and I imagine things because of the way the words have been written. And it gives me joy to write like that. I think even when I was reading it, I was like, hi, this shot is there, this shot is there, this shot is there, you know? So you can kind of see what I have shot with Divan and Meenal and everybody coming together. They've all read this, and you know, this is what even a version of this is what they would have imagined also. So when I talk about how a scene is going to be, is how what my vision is or what my breakdown is, everyone's on the same page because they're all imagining what I've written, you know. So I think that's where maybe reading has a role to play in that, in just communicating and being able to tell a story in the most vivid possible manner. You don't have to do it like that, but I like to do it like that.
No, it's wonderful because you can actually see it. You can actually, when you're reading it, I think what happens is that the way you write, you know, the person who's reading it might not imagine it the way you've imagined it, but they'll imagine some version of it because it's so vividly described, you know, in terms of the emotion on screen. There are a bunch of people in your life as a creator that said yes to, right? That's Mrs. Raghubir, Vikramaditya Motwane, Aditya Chopra, Althea Kaushal, Sudeep Sharma, you know, Karnesh Sharma. There was also this club that you were a part of, and that really, you know, bolstered this will to become a director and to bring Bulbul to life. How do you recognize the right yeses in a sea of no's? There are lots of no's in different forms.
In different forms. There are lots of no's throughout your life. You know, it's quite sad. I think most of us and most children are told, no, you can't do this, more often than yes, you can. And that becomes a narrative, and you start believing, and then you start questioning, because then you are now an adult, and now you are transposing that no to everything. So self-doubt sinks in, and all of that happens. I think my first ever instance is Mrs. Raghubir. Like you said, actually, you have to just look at my thank you slate, and suddenly Mrs. Raghubir. Yes, that's so she was my English elective teacher in 11th standard, and she told me, at that point in time I wanted to be a chef, but she told me that you are a writer, you are a storyteller, and this is what you should do when you grow up. Because she actually asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, chef. And I think what about her, yes, what is great is not just, not that it's not a teacher's opinion. It's not like I was a teacher's pet. It's not that. She saw something, she received something about me. And you can feel that. You know, you can feel that this person has given it thought. There is nothing that this person has to gain from this at all. She's actually talking about a possible ability that I might have that I might not see at that age. And just that, even though, like I said, I did not want to be a writer at that point in time. And I did not know I already was, because she told me so. And she also pointed out that no, not every child has notebooks full of poetry and stories. That's you. And that what it did, you know, Smriti, over the years, say even as late as coming into the film industry, and then when you hear someone saying, oh, but, or you imagine that that's what people then say about me, that you don't know how to do this. And you're always actually waiting to be found out that you don't really know how to do this. I would just tell myself, Mrs. Raghubir, she thought I could do it, you know, and that yes had so much power that it would resonate across the years, even when you are down and out and you can doubt yourself so much and so often, because like you said, the no's are so much more. People are going to question your ability to write. People are going to question your ability to write for the film industry. People are going to question your ability to become a director because you're a writer. You have not done the things that are supposedly required to become a director. So and holding on to that yes. And what that yes does is it helps you recognize other yeses. So you can, because you can very easily dismiss it as, oh, this person's being nice. This person is fond of me and is therefore saying this, or this person is just saying it because, you know, it's just easier to say, nahi. But don't be silly. I love the way you write. But you can start recognizing it. And I think the next was Althea, who read the 2-pager. She was actually the only person I showed the 2-pager to. And because, I mean, she's somebody who will tell me I'm fantastic and I'll believe it. And she'll tell me I'm terrible and I'll believe it. Because I know when she says it, she means it. She is true. She's authentic. She's like something out of a fantasy story. She's authentic. And she read it. And in her style, she just, first thing that came out of her mouth was, you're going to direct this, babe. I just laughed. And that's it, because I was not thinking of directing. But the next thing she said was, so write it. And she's the only person that I could say it to, I don't think I'm good enough to write this. She said, you will not know till you do it. But I didn't. It took me a few years. And I was part of the Skeptic Tank, the script club, Sunday script club that we used to all meet. So thankful to Vikramaditya for making me a part of that, because it was just unexpected and wonderful. And I think a collective of people, very different kinds of storytellers. First thing that it did was I started reading other people's scripts would come. You read great stories, and then I would read stories, I mean, scripts written by Sudeep, by Devashish, by Akshat, by Chaubey, by Nabdi. It gives you such joy when you read something that's well written that it gives you permission to be good. You know, it doesn't make you scared. It doesn't make you, oh no. So what it did was, it did not make me feel, ye log itne talented hai, main to bahut kharab hu. No. It made me feel, oh, so you can write like this, and it's not really supposed to be like that, and you can do whatever you feel like doing, because everybody's doing whatever they feel like doing. And that gave me a bit of strength. And then, of course, Vikramaditya started pushing me, and he would keep asking me, like, Dee, where's your script? That tumhari script kab aayegi? I was like, aayegi. I'll be like, it's going to come. And of course, magical kind of things happen. I went out of town. I'd gone to Calcutta actually, and came back from Calcutta after a sari shopping, kind of a binge, fish eating kind of a trip, and beautiful, absorbing Bengal. I love Bengal. I came back, and Kalpana, who lives with me, she told me, come outside, a bird has made a nest on the champa tree. And I went out. This is just when I came back from the airport, and there was a bulbul had made a nest. And I got on to the next flight to Goa, which was 4 hours later. And I was like, you know what, just write it. And then I told Althea, of course, because I was like, I'm going to write it. And 15 days later, she called me and she's like, how's it going? I said, great, I'm getting into the zone. And she was like, what? That means you're not writing. I was like, no, I'm getting into the zone. She said, tomorrow morning, I'm going to call you. I said, no, you know, I write at night. And she said, I don't care. I'm calling you first thing in the morning before dawn. You're going to get up and write. She called me at 4:30 in the morning. She lives in Dubai. That means she set an alarm for 3. 4:30 in the morning, stayed on the phone till I made my coffee, till I sat and chatted with her. She knew I was awake. She did it for 3 days in a row. And it became a habit. Until today, I wake up, not at 4:30, but I wake up at 5 and I write in the morning. And I started writing it, and I realized that just as the story was waiting, it was just patiently waiting for me to write it, because then I wrote it in, I don't know, 14 days. Because it was waiting for so many years, and I sent it to the script club, and they read it and they loved it. And these are people who are very critical, violently so. They are not going to be nice to, especially within the script club. All of us very, 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 no kid gloves were involved. We used to say what was exactly needed to be said, and they loved it. And that's another round of yes that happens, and you start believing it. Only when I maybe because I got into the habit of hearing that true yes. And when I finished writing it, I knew that I was going to direct it, because I was clear that I'm not giving the story to anyone else. It belongs only to me. It's mine. And then came people like Karnesh, my producer, Anushka, Anshay, my creative producer. These are people who read it and just very matter of factly, never even questioned, never didn't say those things that other people had said. Oh, but you've never AD'd. That, so how will you direct? You know. And Anshay, who's been an AD, said that kuch nahi hota, AD वेडी कुछ नहीं सीखते तुम. You are just, it just requires common sense. गधा मजदूरी की job है. It has nothing to do with making a film. कुछ नहीं होता उससे. You know, so when you hear those things, you start believing it. And when Karnesh, with such delight and joy for stories, he read it, and he read it when he was still in the Merchant Navy. He was not even a producer. He read it.
He was not even producing. How lovely! How lovely! He loved it.
He loved it. And then he told me one day that, you know, if ever I turn producer, then I would want to make this film. And then he did turn producer, and it took him some time to consolidate, and he made lovely films before we decided to make Bulbul. And by that time, Netflix came to India. In fact, the India office had not physically opened, but they were coming to India, and we were in talks with them. And they said yes. Then my HOD said yes. So Divan said yes, and Meenal said yes, and Veera said yes. And they all said yes to the story, not to me, not for any love. So that's how you recognize it, because it's for the work. Mrs. Raghubir, down to the last HOD, to my producers, to my actors, said yes to the work that I put in, to the story that I told. It wasn't to me. It wasn't for the sake of, you know, Althea and I have hung out over a drink and said, what if? Lots of our conversations are, what if, you know, these two women are like, and then, you know, you're talking, and at no point in time did she say, you're going to direct this book, or write this, or wake me up for it. But she did it for Bulbul because she recognized something there that spoke to her. I think it's, they say yes to the work.
No, but more power to them, and a big thank you to all the people who said yes to the work, because look what came out of it. Going to the work.
Yes to yourself. Actually, that's
Yes.
the best thing that it does. So you start believing in yourself and start recognizing yourself. And it's so sad. You wait for someone else's, again, validation. But you get into the habit of hearing a yes.
You know, Anvita, what also fascinates me about your work is that for someone who's a wordsmith, you know, you write and is deeply influenced by the world of words. You use silences beautifully. You know, in Bulbul, Binodini's treachery is all words, but Bulbul becomes even more silent with wisdom. You know, she looks like someone who is not really kind of looking to either justify herself or her actions or to counter a cutting remark that has been made by another person. Can you speak a little more about the use of silence, moods, settings, spaces in storytelling, especially in Bulbul?
I think even when you read, you know, dialogue is it's not dialogue heavy, book dialogue heavy. And in real life also, when you're in a room, when you're not constantly chatting. If you're constantly chatting, that means there's not much that you have to say. You know? So the unsaid is always more powerful in any case. But in a visual medium like a film, even if there's dialogue, what is not being said is always more interesting. And specific to Bulbul, you know, it's like the bogeyman that you can see versus the bogeyman that you can't. You imagine something under your bed, or that noise you heard in the drawing room in the middle of the night when you know no one is there, and you're frightened to go to that room. And then you walk in and then you see ki hawa ki wajah se the paper is fluttering, and then you're not frightened anymore. The same is with silences. The quieter I keep it, the more you worry, the more you feel, the more you imagine. And that, I think, is what is interesting about silences. And then, of course, on paper, I use words to describe that silence, because that scene is barely a few seconds long, or it's a long scene written the way it's imagined. But in specifically in the case of Bulbul, in terms of her character, the wiser you get, the quieter your mind gets. It's all that, the chatter in your mind, your own voices, other people's voices. When you truly come face to face with yourself, and you recognize yourself and you understand yourself and grow up, when you see yourself for who you are and you're fine with it, things go a little quiet in your mind. And when they go a little quiet in your mind, you will not necessarily say everything that you're thinking. Terry Pratchett has one character called Esme Weatherwax, who's a witch. And there's a line that describes her, that she could make you feel like a fool just by listening to you. And I was like, when I grow up, I want to be her. But I was like, so that's who Bulbul is. So the other people will talk themselves around in circles and get a little frazzled, and it always happens when someone is not saying something, you want to justify and fill that silence with words to kind of explain yourself. And that she has that power. And because she's really quiet, she's centered, she can possibly only hear her own breath. So that is, as far as the character is concerned, the silence is that for her. The quietude in her mind.
And what about the mood and the setting, and just like the play with spaces that you particularly believe in, and you've done that in Bulbul?
Yeah.
How does that work? How do you create that?
I think, again, I go back to reading. What happens is, when you read beautiful books, great stories set in wonderful worlds, you imagine those worlds, you get a sense of understanding of aesthetics. Aesthetics become important. Beauty becomes important for you in everything. And therefore, then you're drawn to art. You're drawn to, from fabric to the way a piece of glass looks, the way light falls on the water. Everything where there is visual aesthetic also you start seeing it. Your mind is now attuned to noticing things. And those things are important for me, and not for the sake of beauty, but for telling the story. Everything that is there visually in Bulbul, the film, yes, it's beautiful. Thank you. And I think it's beautiful. And the credit goes to everybody who made it possible, because I can only imagine it. The moonlight is not read for the sake of being read, because it'll be interesting. It's there because something happens and a blood moon is formed. And because it's a fantasy, what we were talking about earlier, you can play to tell something important. You can play with the magical aspect, the fantastical aspect of the story. The way it looks, her clothes and everything. Raja Ravi Verma was painting at the same time that the story is set in. The way the women, the kind of clothes that they wore, the Thakur Badis, the Thakuranis wore Banarsis. Weavers from Banaras would weave for them. So Bulbul is wearing, and so is Binodini wearing Banarsis. The image of the fan that she uses is from the Ravi Verma painting. And therefore I wanted to use that. And Meenal did these beautiful things of taking elements from various paintings and using them. I was like, Bulbul is the Uttam Naika, and the rest of it is the painting, it's the backdrop. So Diwan, with the way he lit her, the way he painted that painting, and Meenal, the way she's built that world around her, made it feel like that, made it feel like a Raja Ravi Verma painting.
Gorgeous.
But yeah, so that's how all these things, all the elements, aesthetics and everything come as part of storytelling.
There's one last question I have about the film itself. You did a very, you did storyboards which were very different because they were not really traditional storyboards. And the other thing that you did was that you went on the tech recce with your team, and with the ADs and with different people, you kind of shot the entire thing on video. So, yeah, because that's what you guys did. You kind of blocked the whole thing on.
Guess which scene this is.
Is this the one where, okay, I could be totally wrong. Is this the one where Satya, Binodini and Bulbul are talking when Binodini comes back?
Yes, it is that. But you're seeing it from this side. See where Siddharth is holding his iPhone?
Yes, yes.
My A is sitting over there. The first AC is doing Dhoni into air. The rest of us are watching. But yeah, we blocked the thing. But yeah, storyboards, I mean, I eventually, for especially the VFX portions, they were professional storyboards because you need to get storyboards and all of that. But yes, my short breakdown is a mixture of what I've written and what I've drawn. My visual short breakdown and sketches were a source of great amusement.
Because they were stick figures, right?
My AD team, and I was like, "Kitne अच्छे से draw किया?" And they were like, "No." Somebody needs to wake up. Oh, that's just her scars and all. Oh, that's her hanging upside down. That's solo shot for. I mean, I've done her separately. Where the actual there on the right hand side is the short breakdown of her coming down ulta. Satya is in the carriage. The first time the Chudail comes, she comes, her hair comes. And the rest of her, she's face to face. Oh, that's her jumping over the moon. Yes.
Anvita, we should play Pictionary together sometime.
Of course you can understand this. This is so clear.
I want to know, Anvita, that in a career spanning almost 3 decades, what were your greatest challenges as a creator?
Smriti, the challenges are nothing to do with work or career. The challenges are always internal, at least for me. I think my greatest challenge has been to become more of me. First of all, to become aware of the fact that you're supposed to be, and your me is actually not this, it's just an imagine what society tells you, what your family tells you, what your seniors tell you, what your bosses tell you, what your colleagues tell you, what your peers tell you, what your friends tell you. You are not that. And that has been to come there, and then you start feeling like a child. I think you're like this when you're a child, because you're not colored by any glass other than your own. The wonder and the joy that I have in everything is a story that you're telling yourself. Now you want to tell the stories to yourself also that make sense, that are beautiful and kind and lovely. You want to build a tribe, a chorus of people who might be very different from you, but who belong to that world of being okay, and being okay with yourself and seeing the joy, who can laugh and just be good people. And it's amazing, the more you feel like this, those are the people who come into your life, and the others seem to just fall away. I think that has been the challenge. That has been the challenge, to stand up and say, I can do this. I might not know that this lens means that, but I know her eyes, her eyes, her eyes. I know that. And just to know that is enough. To know that there'll be a red moonlight, to know that blood will flow like that, to know that there will be the Jatayu Vadham painting because it says so much about that moment. To know that everybody who's a part of this journey is there because of those things that you believe in. And so it's great to know that they are going to do their best. They're going to be excited about telling your story. How wonderful is that? And therefore, I made a film with ease, with joy, and happiness. And I think that's more important than anything else. I think it's when people are liking the film or it's becoming well known or recognized, it's happening because of that, because they're seeing that something true is being told, and something true can be told if you're true to yourself and you're fine. If you're angst ridden and dunya kharab hai aur meri jo vision and I'm an artist and all that, you'll be busy proving you're an artist instead of just being delighted, you know, at the possibility of having to tell this story and to tell it like this. You know, Anshay used to sometimes say that, and it's slightly scary. You know, there's an andhi and lights have flown off and you have a smile on your face. So it's slightly say, that's because look at the lightning. Slightly psychotic. But I was like, the lightning is so beautiful, let's shoot the lightning. So you become that let's shoot the lightning person when everything else is sinking. And that is more important for me than possibly even having made Global.
I want to ask you something constructive, because I think that for some strange reason we are not looking inwards, and we've made this about blaming people and going on witch hunts. But any tragedy also leads to questioning systems, and questioning systems across the board, and not just within one industry. But because we belong to the film industry, my question to you is that what are the key things you feel can change in the industry or alter in the industry to make it a more humane space?
Firstly, and I'm not just saying it because of what we have been talking about, no, I wish there were more readers in the industry. Because when you read, it teaches you to imagine things and their consequences. And therefore you think twice before saying an unkind word, or not being generous, or not being accepting. Just the vitriol, the poison that comes out, you will think twice because you will imagine the consequences to yourself, in your mind and in your body, to constantly be angry or upset, and to the person who's on the receiving end. So you will not be cruel, you will not be dismissive, you will not be, not treat the person like another or make them feel alienated or not as if they don't belong. None of that will happen if you have a little bit of empathy. I think so. Unfortunately, maybe it's I don't know if it's too late and we can just send them books. But how do you change people? But I truly believe one person at a time, one day at a time. Look to yourself and just that one person you're working, one person. Everybody does that. I know it sounds trite, but you're working, you have someone who's reporting to you, someone that you've hired to do a job for you, whether it's a writer or a lyricist. Usko izzat utni de do. So just that person will go home happy. Chances are that person is going to hopefully do the same thing. So the anger, the simmering anger comes from what? From being thwarted, being made to feel small. And those are the people when they come into power, or even if they don't come into power, they poison. They try to, I don't know, it sounds trite. I know it sounds trite.
No, it doesn't sound trite. I think it's
just very simple. It's just very simple, actually. एक बारी स्ट्रेंजर को देख के बोलो कि अरे तुम्हारे हाथ में जो थैली है वो कितनी प्यारी है. क्या जाता है तुम्हारा? Just because I know you sometimes think because सब चिल्ला रहे हैं तो तुम्हें भी चिल्लाना पड़ेगा to be heard. No, sometimes when you go quiet, people lean in to listen. Just be kind to yourself. You know, sometimes I think we are not kind enough to ourselves, therefore we hurt others. Just learn to be a little kind to yourself. Actually, वो ही कर लो ना, बहुत बड़ी बात है. बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है दूसरों के साथ unkind होना. Because you're in a good place.
It's that mindfulness, and the thing is that it's not that we can be perfect.
And if you read, you become very mindful because you have the patience to be in the moment. Books teach you that. Nothing teaches you that.
I want to say it on the show so that at least it's documented. But I hope that I hope you really think about turning Bulbul into a graphic novel. It would be wonderful. I think it would be so wonderful for people to read it and for kids to read it and for everybody to kind of plug into it because it's such a wonderful tale. So I'm hoping, and I'm also offering my services that if you need my help, if you need me to work on anything to do with that, I'd be happy to, because it'll be just wonderful to bring it out.
Hello, everyone.
Can Vishwapriya S. Iyer be unmuted, please?
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Amrita ma'am. So the glimpses of the script of Bulbul that I've just witnessed is like otherworldly. So I would really love if you could like release the whole script so that everyone can like immerse themselves into the world of Bulbul. And I mean, it's really beautiful. Like I can't believe like I think 4 sentences helped me look at the story entirely differently, even though I've seen it visually. The question I have is that when it comes to storytelling, often it blurs the boundaries of timelines. So how would you say an age-old fable or folklore influences what you write, a song or a film, in the current timeline? Like an example of a fable or a folklore that has influenced you regardless of what you're writing, even if it's based on today's world.
Anything, like if you read anything written by Angela Carter, or there are so many writers who subvert fairy tales set in the present context. You read anything that even if you're watching today, your vampire shows, all of that you see set in modern times in the streets of New York, that's age-old legends and myths being used today to tell stories of today. When Fifth Element came out, nobody had seen anything like that before. But if you'd been reading, you would have read those books in the 1950s and the 40s. So the thing about fairy tales is that they're always relevant. Myths and legends, myths are so relevant, they become religion. So they are that powerful. They are the in gardening पहले क्यारी होती है, flower pot में जो मिट्टी होती है और फिर आप खाद डालते हैं. Myths and legends are that. Things grow in that. Other stories grow in that. So they will always be relevant in present day context, whichever timeline you want to put, you want to set it in the future, it will still work. So you can take anything. Like I want to say something that, somebody once asked Einstein in an interview, so how can the future generation be made more intelligent? Because he was somebody who had the highest IQ ever, right? So he was asked, the future more intelligent. He said, read them fairy tales. And he said, you want to make them more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. So they will always be relevant regardless of where you set it, which timeline. And you just have to go to any bookstore and pick up even the latest fantastical novel, and you will recognize legends and myths of old, because those are the ones that are being subverted, as we are calling it today. But it's actually just people retelling myths through and through. People who rise from the dead, twins who are separated at birth, an evil twin and a good twin. These are all stories from myths. We're still telling them.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for this session. Like hearing all the anecdotes, I feel so inspired right now. And I'm a copywriter in an ad agency myself.
Very good. You're on the right path.
And I came across this quote multiple people have told me this, that, write about, like, the most personal stuff is the most creative. And I've always struggled with this, like, do I only write about stuff that I've experienced? Because, currently I'm working on a menstrual cup brand and I have no experience about that. I don't even know what menstruation feels like. Similarly, like, you've written something which dabs in the supernatural realm. So how do you personally...
My feet are twisted. I have understood what you're saying. No, when they say that write what you know doesn't mean what has happened to you in terms of incidents. Write what you know as a human being, what it feels to feel small, what it feels to succeed, what it feels to have your heart broken, what it feels to inflict cruelty on someone and get away with it. Write what you know as a human being, not in terms of incidents. Then half the literature will just disappear from this planet if everybody was writing what they write what they know as people, as empathetic human beings. Doesn't necessarily mean, by that logic, I should only write stories about the Air Force or about advertising or Annapurna Atta, God in heaven above. That's the brand I worked on for 4 years. Terrible. So, no. Write what you know. Yes, when you're starting out and you want to write a story, sometimes the familiar helps to situate you. In my case, even if I set a story in Punjab and all that, उसमें कहीं ना कहीं से कोई प्रेत type चीज आ जाएगी, because that's how my mind works. Maybe that's the thing that you're maybe working on. So one of the things that Smriti and I were talking about in advertising, creative people have this slight snobbery towards, first of all, certain kind of brands you don't want to work on because उसपे award नहीं मिलते. Secondly, बड़ा research होता है. It's so annoying, campaign की लग जाती है because you are now going for research because somebody in the Bimaru state से said पर हमारे घर में तो ऐसा होता है, and your campaign is cool. You know what I loved the most about advertising was research, because it told me about people. It tells you how a person in Bihar thinks, or Maharashtra thinks, or Kerala thinks. A housewife, a school teacher, a school principal in Kerala thinks like that. So now when I sit down to write a story, and I'm writing about, because it's a news thing that I heard about a woman serial killer in Kerala. And because I met that woman, there is something that I can draw from her. To know what it means to be part of a family. I've lived in Kerala, so I know what that is like. So I pick up things. Everything is material. Even when you're standing and having a breakup with your girlfriend and she's telling you your shit, it's material. It'll come in handy, trust me. So what you know means that. Be a sponge, absorb everything you read, watch it, go for research. Next time servicing comes to you and says, इसके लिए research के लिए भेज रहे हैं, से मुझे भी आना. It will help. So that's what you know.
Hi, I really enjoyed the session.
Thank you.
All Dial-M session. I think this was my favorite so far. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, like, so the few snippets you shared from the screenplay, it's very unconventional. It's not like other screenplays we read. Like, language is almost very novel-like, very flowery. So where did you get the courage to just break the convention?
See, that's the thing. If you are writing to break convention, the writing will suffer. You are writing like this because you can't help it. So, if, by the way, when I write, sometimes there are words and sentences in Hindi also. Or sometimes there is an Urdu word over there because what I'm trying to only come across with that word. You write the way you write. Even if it is in 2-word sentences. Even if it is in Hindi, even if it is in Marathi, Bengali, whatever you fucking feel like you do. You write the way you write. No, you're not writing to break convention or impress anybody. Your story should impress somebody. You're writing not the how you string the words together, no. But once those words are strung, what is it that person's seeing or receiving in that moment? That is important. Content of what you are saying is important than how you are saying it. The how is a tool. In my case, that's how I write. I just write like that. मेरा दिमाग वैसे चलता है. So it's that. It's not a question of कि I was trying to break convention. उसके लिए डांट भी पड़ती है. There are writers who will first time when they look at a script visually, they will be like, oh, this will be full of purple prose and this baroque style of writing is not about. It's not. जो आपने बोला, such a bad word for a screenplay writer to hear flowery. Oh. That's gali. नहीं होना चाहिए flowery. It has to tell you. Your screenplay has to tell you what is happening in that moment. The dialogue has to. It has to convey visually what is happening. In my case, because that moment is so visual, and because if you've seen the film, have you seen the film? Oh, you have seen the film. So you remember that scene where she's beaten. You see what it looks like and what it feels like. So for me to able to communicate even to myself, I had to write it like that. Not because never write to impress. Just write to tell the story in the best way that you can, even if it is in gibberish. Impress करने के लिए break क्या follow करने के लिए मत. 100 लोग तुम्हें बोलेंगे कि कैसे लिखते हैं. What they're essentially trying to do is tell you कि these are the skill sets of telling a story. They are enabling you. जैसे हम paper, pencil, ink, keypad, laptop, iPad, phone use करते हैं. These are just skills and guidelines to follow. It's not, tell your story. Don't worry about how it's to be written and what language to use and how to explain something. Just always be aware that the best possible way that I can communicate this, I'm going to write it like that. That's it.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi, Karan.
I'm reading Joseph Campbell these days.
Ah,
So basically, what I was asking you that, sorry?
which one are you reading? The Power of Myth? Or
Yeah, The Power of Myth and A Hero with a Thousand Faces, the two books, yeah. So as I wrote in the chat as well, that he says that myths are public dreams and dreams are like private myths. So this is a quote by Joseph Campbell, and I would like to like ask you this question: that how do you see mythologies are so integral with our film narratives? They are very important for a film narrative, and I think it's a quite a question, because when I watched Bulbul, and I saw that there is a reference with Kadambari Devi's story. So is it true, or is it like something which I'm only thinking? And yeah.
not
yeah,
only thinking, it is there slightly.
Okay. And ma'am, so how do you explain the power of myths in a film narrative like Bulbul?
Let me ask you a question. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Now that you're reading Joseph Campbell and you're reading The Power of Myth and A Hero, Thousand Faces, tell me what mythology have you read?
So, ma'am, actually, I'm just starting. I've just started reading the book. It's not complete yet. I've not completed the book yet.
मैं एक चीज बोलूं? You'll enjoy the book more if you.
Yes, ma'am.
From online, you can go. If the most fun and the simpler ones are Stephen Fry's Greek mythology. You can read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Read the Greek and the Norse mythology. Very easy to read. They're like short stories.
Yes.
Great
Yes,
fun. Read those and then read Campbell. Because when he's talking about the power of myth,
Yes,
you need
ma'am.
to know what he's referring to. That's
Yes.
the fun of reading. Because otherwise, then you're reading like kuch seekhne ke liye.
Right.
But it'll be more fun. And also what Campbell was like a Jungian. So even to understand the Jungian references, you also need to know what Jung stood for. But that's okay. We can avoid that. But read, even if it is short stories, you have graphic novels on myths. It'll be fun for you to read the myths and then read the book.
Yes.
This is just me giving gyan because I'm older than you. But the role of myths is this. First, you have to read them. And you will enjoy them. And when you read them, you'll recognize stories. You'll recognize stories in today's days. You'll get a sense of it. You don't even have to, even if you're somebody who's not read Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Even if you've read our stories, our literature, you will recognize those myths from our mythology. If you've read the Mahabharata, for example, it is a minefield of stories. There are stories about transgenders. There are stories about sex change. There's story about the same-sex relationships. Everything in Mahabharata. It's beautiful. Is my effigy going to be burned? Meghna, please cut this out. That's what I mean. Myths become legends because they have so much. Myths become religion because they have so much power, and that's how the power of myth. Exactly what Campbell is saying. It's a collective consciousness. How we make sense of the world. The first stories. What are myths? The first stories. What were the earlier gods? Our pagan gods, what are called pagan or whatever, pagan cultures like Greek and Norse mythology. Fire god, sun god, rain god, river god. Things that you try to make, say you're living in a cave, in a forest, you're trying to make sense of the world. So these are gods because you have no control over them. You can beg them to give you food or sunlight or, rain so that your crops can grow. So they become gods. They're just myths. So you build stories to make sense of the world. It's a collective, and it's amazing because if you look at Greek myths, Norse myths, and our myths, they're almost the same because you have the sun god, you have the fire god, you have the same gods. You're making sense of the same world. People forget that. That's the sad part. So of course, that's like I was talking earlier, that they are relevant even today. Miss Iyer, I was telling it.
Yes.
But पहले myths पढ़ लो, फिर Campbell पढ़ना.
I also want to tell everyone who's watching the session and people who are on the session that, over the weekend, we are also going to release a reading list, by Anvita. It'll be like a whole list of books that Anvita has read. But if you want to partake of what she's reading, that list will be out. So please dive into it. At least I am doing that.
So ma'am, like as aspiring filmmakers, what are the few things you would like to tell us which we shouldn't do? Instead of telling ये करो, आप अपनी गलतियों से क्या बताना चाहेंगे कि हम ये गलती ना करें? Avoid these mistakes that I've made. Like, is there anything you would like to tell?
Don't be afraid to share your ideas with people. I mean, it's not something that I didn't do. I did share my ideas, but initially you are always a little nervous. Don't be afraid of bad ideas, bad writing. There's no such thing. The first reader is you. So don't judge yourself like that. Just put down your story. Set down. If you don't believe in yourself, तो दूसरा क्या तुम पे believe करेगा? है ना? So just believe in yourself first. Be kind to yourself. So do those things, because we waste a lot of time being harsh and judging ourselves, and that stops us from writing. Because I'm not good enough, and maybe I can't do this, and I had this idea, but maybe someone else can write it. But you have to just sit down and write it. Who cares? No one's going to judge you. Just put it down on paper in longhand like I do, or type it out, or on your phone, whichever works for you. Put it down. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid then, after you've written it, to share it with people who will give you true feedback. It can be a very frightening thing because you're naked and not in a good way. So you have to just give it to people, and people you trust to give you true feedback that will work. And may God grant you the patience and the wisdom, because that takes long time in coming, to sit down and take that feedback. I think that's what you need to do. Be kind to yourself, don't judge yourself, and be open to sharing your ideas. Because you'll only learn, because उतना arrogance हो ही नहीं सकता कि तुम्हें सब आता है. किसी को नहीं आता. तो इससे तुम्हें भी नहीं डर लगना चाहिए. अच्छा, किसी को नहीं आता, पहले तो यही समझ लो, किसी को नहीं आता. You know, some people are projecting. You don't need to project. तुम्हें जो आता है उस पे काम करो. Make that, just become better at that. Keep doing that more and more, because there'll be more than enough people who will know what they're. So always ride on the shoulders of giants. Get the people who know what they are doing to work with you. And people will see. If you have faith in your story, the producer will see it. The actor will see it. Half the time they're going by instinct. They're judging the story and seeing whether this person has the capability, and it doesn't mean that you know everything. it means what you know it really well. So work on that.
It was wonderful listening to you. So
Thank
my
you. Everybody doesn't have to say that. I feel very like बेचारे बोलना पड़ रहा है.
no, but
मन से बोल रहे.
literally, मन से बोल. So you have a huge repertoire of amazing work. I think you should probably write a book on the stories behind them actually. Of all the songs which you have written, all the things, I think you should write a story behind all the.
Rather write stories too. It's just writing stories about myself. वो वाली story तो मुझे पता है. I'd rather write a new story.
So how difficult does it become for a lyricist or a script writer to draw inspirations without being branded as plagiarism?
Everything that happens to you, everything that you read and watch is inspiration. If it inspires you to be brave, if it inspires you to sit down and pick up that pen and do that hard work to write, you will not plagiarize. No? All that it needs to do is inspire you to be like, Are wah, let me also write. See, this writer's written so well, let me also write. This filmmaker's made this film, even I want to write a film. I want to make a film. I want to tell a story like this. I want to tell a moving, deep, realistic story. I want to tell a crime thriller. I want to tell a story like Mahanagar. I've read Terry Pratchett and I want to tell a mad story set in this alternate universe. That is inspiration. When things give you permission to at least think of doing something new. So then you will not plagiarize. Because that's what you want to do. You want to do something new and wonderful because that's what they are doing. No one is copying other people and, trying to take scenes from other people or write a book like somebody else. They're just trying to be themselves, and which is why they are great, which is why we are inspired by them. So just be inspired to be like that, be original as much as you can. Subconscious inspiration may creep into your work, but that's a risk that you run.
Anvita ma'am, you have said in an interview that all the stories that I write introduce some supernatural or fantasy elements. Okay, so my question is, do you create the supernatural world as an artist to satisfy your artistic persona, or as a trapped human being who finds solace in that fantasy world? And how do you keep that creation intact on the screen?
How interesting. What a good question. I think subconsciously and psychologically speaking, it's the latter. You possibly do it because you find solace in an imagined world to deal with the existing world. But I do it, I don't consciously do it. I don't say ki, acha, suppose I have an idea of two people who run away on a train and the train catches fire and then they have to escape in the desert and whatever. I can't help it because when I'll be writing, two people will be on the train and the train catches fire, and then the one person will realize that the other person is not getting burnt by the fire. And then we'll wonder why. That might lead to a rift with them, but eventually they'll realize that that's how this person will save this person. And basically because they have some kind of a power, or is a dragon, or is the son of Agni or Surya or whatever. मेरा दिमाग वहाँ चला जाता है automatically. You give me a story about dhania, it will become supernatural. But without consciously say, let me tell a story about. ऐसे नहीं सोचती मैं, वैसा हो जाता है. When I sat down to write Bulbul, the first image was not ki some supernatural thing. No, it was just feet withdrawing in fear. And that feeling of fear was so palpable. I was like, why would she be so scared, and what would happen to her? So that's how the story came. But yes, possibly it is because maybe it's a form of solace. It's my way of dealing with the world, or my way of being able to say what I really want to say. Pushing the envelope, say visually or conceptually. You to ask me philosophy wala question, how do I answer? You're my shrink.
Listen, guys, we are done with all the questions. I hope this was. I want to thank everyone who joined us, all of you who are here and asked such lovely questions. And Anvita, thank you for the time that you put into this. I'm so grateful. This was one of those sessions that has also made me go into a completely uncharted territory, and because of that I've learned so much, and I can't wait to read what you've read and also re-look at Bulbul with completely new eyes. So thank you for Bulbul, thank you for the time that you've given us. Do consider taking out the script, do also consider making a graphic novel, and can't wait to receive more stories from you. So more power to you, and may your tribe grow and increase.
Thank you.
I want to tell everyone that next week on Thursday, we have another session with a wonderful creator called Ishika Mohan Motwane. Anvita knows her really well. It's a jackpot for us that we have two women with a brilliant eye doing sessions for us back to back. Ishika Mohan Motwane is a wonderful photographer, and she's also an actor. So she will be talking about how you capture the energy behind the camera and actors, the art of being a fly on the wall. I think it'll be an incredible session because I love the work that Ishika does. And she's also a very shy person, so you haven't heard her speak very often, but she's going to be on the show, and she's going to reveal her process to us. So thank you everyone, have a great evening, and Anvita, see you for a glass of wine soon.
Yes.
Thank you again
for patiently listening to me ramble. God bless you all. Eat something yummy today, huh?